Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. Before we begin, Sarah and I just wanted to thank everybody who's been listening in and writing in and letting us know what you think about the podcast and how it's been helping you. And we wanted to connect back with our audience. So we have decided to move forward with an event that would like to invite everybody to so that we can get to know each other on a more intimate level and talk about your questions in a live format. And I'm going to let Sarah let you know what that's going to look like.
So what we've come up with is an online community question and answer live Zoom. And we thought a really good time to do this would be just before the holidays, because that can be a really tricky time for people if you're struggling with food, with a lot of food anxiety and having to deal with families and social situations. So we gave it some thought and we came up with the idea of doing an online community live Q&A session on Zoom. And so this is going to be on the 19th of December, 2021. Of course, as you guys probably know, Steph and I are in different time zones. So in the UK, it's going to be 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. And Steph, do you want to fill us in with the US times?
Yeah, sure. So Eastern time, it's going to be noon to 2 p.m. Hopefully, wherever you are, you'll be able to join in and ask your questions or just listen to other people's questions and hear the answers and just get some community feeling around this time of year, and also to get some of your questions answered in a live back and forth way.
If you want to sign up to the event and come and meet us, then please go to the link below. We want to make sure that this is affordable and accessible for people who want to come. So there is an option to pay whatever you can afford. One of the reasons why we do what we do is because it's about community and it's about feeling less alone when you are struggling with these kinds of problems around food and body image. So bringing people together is what we are all about. We really look forward to meeting some of you in December. If you are listening to this in the future, please do look out for future events, because this is something that if this one goes well, I'm sure we will want to do more of them. Anyway, we've taken enough of your time. Let's just get on with the episode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Life After Diets. Today, we're talking about all or nothing thinking and what that is and how that gets in our way and how it shows up when we're trying to heal from diets and binge eating. So, Sarah, how do you define all or nothing thinking? How do you see it showing up?
Well, firstly, I'm so glad that we're doing this episode because I think this subject is so important, particularly when we're talking about something like dieting, binging, because that is the ultimate manifestation of the all or nothing mindset. So I think probably during this episode, we might interchange between all or nothing and black and white thinking. And we're basically talking about the same thing. So the way I understand it, the way I talk about it, all or nothing, black and white thinking is about trying to put something into one thing or the other. It's labeling, it's judgments. It's this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And life and experience and being human is so much more complicated than that. I've got some thoughts about why we do this, which I think we'd probably get into, but I've not yet met one person who struggles with binge eating who doesn't also recognize this tendency in them. It's the one thing without fail. The people-pleasing side of things, I'd say, is like 98% of people who struggle with binge eating, but black and white, all or nothing thinking is all of us. And that is my black and white, all or nothing conclusion.
I don't know, though. I think it's interesting because when I was thinking about the concept, I feel like I recognize my black and white thinking now. Like I can see how I was doing it then. I don't know that I would have said I'm a black and white thinker, but now I'm like, yes. I remember my mother actually telling me that I was a black and white thinker from a younger age, but even during my binge eating and, the all or nothingness. And I didn't see it that way because I needed to categorize things that way to make my life make sense. So maybe talking about some of the ways that it can show up and what it actually looks like in case that needs to be clarified.
When I say to somebody, do you think you're quite an all or nothing person? That's how I'd normally phrase the question. People seem to be able to recognize that in themselves. The black and white thinking, maybe not so much, because I think that's not always so clear to people what that means. But all or nothing is a much more descriptive way, I think, of probably describing what we're talking about. I mean, binging is all, deprivation is nothing, right? But I see this in all areas of my life, from productivity to relationships to really minor situations. My tendency can be to move towards that. And I'm much, much less so now than I was when I was younger. I think part of that's been working on recovery. Part of that's been maybe even as I get older as well, and I have more experience. And black and white thinking is painful because you're so invested in a particular answer being true. And when the world doesn't cooperate with what you believe is true, you've hit that resistance, you've hit that conflict and dissonance. That, I think, is the hardest thing to tolerate for somebody who's prone to this, is dissonance, which is that idea of two competing truths, both being true at the same time.
Right. So for food, this shows up. I mean, the most obvious example of this would be if you eat one thing off plan, or just if you even start to feel like you might be leaning into binge territory. Like the fact that that even is there a little bit, it's like you want to then, okay, we push all the way and we turn it into a massive binge, or we eat something off plan and then all of a sudden it's a bad day, so it's now becoming a cheat day. And then tomorrow is the flip side of that. In theory, this is the plan, and that's how it shows up with food, but that it's also showing up with, like you say, with other things in relationships in other ways. But I think also in terms of the way we think of ourselves, that our self-worth is either there or it's not. And that if we exercise this week, it's like a good week or not. And it's I think the tendency to categorize is a way that we feel in control, because when we don't know how to define something, if when things are vague and when things aren't clearly mapped out in our minds, it's hard to know how to deal with it. So if we know that this is one way in an absolute sense and this is another way in an absolute sense, it's two versions of something. And if it's this way, I deal with it like this, and if it's this way, I deal with it like this. I resonate with that, especially with the food, in that if it was a bad day, I knew that my follow-up behavior was going to be compensation. And I knew how to do that. Like, if it was halfway, I didn't really know how to compensate halfway. I needed to know fully how this was going to look so I could go all in. It was just easier. It felt like I could control that. And if it was a good day, then I think in the back of my mind, sometimes I was like, well, then I can binge. I have freedom to binge now. I sort of earned it almost. So it gave me like that full on permission. Whereas in the middle, it was just too confusing and there were too many shades it could be. And I just needed to know what my plan was, because that's how I represented my own order in life. And that's how I moved through life, of understanding what my behavior was going to be.
It reminded me actually of a good friend of mine who we were both struggling with binge eating at the same time. And she said once she decided that a day was going to be a binge day, that it felt like a waste to eat any what she would call quote unquote healthy food.
Yeah.
And I remember even at the time, as a fellow all or nothing thinker, that was a bit further than I was at. Even like
Mm.
I would try and
Oh,
add in something to kind of go, well, at least I ate this
oh yeah.
at the time. But I found a lot of people will do that, and I see it in the groups that I run. At the beginning of the group, we always do a check-in, so everybody goes around and they can say whatever they want to say how they're doing. And a lot of people will check in with their week, what's going on in their week. And I see them doing it over and over again. And it'll be like, oh, I've had a good week, or I've had a bad week. And it's that desire again to label. There's been 7 days, however many hours that is, between the two sessions. And their mind is going over it and it wants to decide, was it good? Was it bad? Okay, here's my answer.
Mm, mm.
When most weeks, there are times when you have a week with loads of great stuff happening and a week where everything really does go wrong. But a lot of the time, it's a balance. And it's like, what are the things that your mind hooks onto? And when this is the problem, this is your struggle, your mind is looking, this is what I see people doing. Their minds are looking for, how did I eat over the last week? And that's
Yeah.
normally what concludes their answer. And
Mm.
everything else about life that might be going well or not going well gets pushed aside and discounted. It becomes this very narrow focus. Good, bad. This is what it is. This is what I'm deciding is true.
Yeah, but that also, it's like a binge can happen sometimes in a flash, right? Or like you could have a quote unquote good day and then the binge happens at night or something like that and it's a bad day now. It's just it gets overrun. And I think the black and white thinking or the all or nothing keeps us from being able to perceive and appreciate the parts of progress or the ways in which we might be making progress or might be feeling good. It's not honoring the process, it's more honoring the result. So it's like if I binged, it was bad instead of I binged and there were parts of my day that felt free or there were decisions I was able to make or there were ways in which I was able to be with myself in a way that I haven't before. But if the binge was present at the end, well, it's bad. It's just bad now. It takes away, I think, from the ability to be compassionate and the ability to stay with yourself and honor the parts that are still making progress, even if the end result isn't quite where you want it to be yet.
Mhm.
And I was pulled up on this quite early, actually, when my binge eating started, and I did a course of CBT. I was just about to say CBT therapy, and that's one of my biggest bugbears because it's
T.
CBT. Yeah, it's the TT. Like
Yeah.
the yes,
T-
it should just be CBT. Otherwise, it's cognitive behavioral therapy. That
I know, I
works,
get you.
yeah. And I caught myself about to do it, and I might even leave that in just to
I
humble.
like how you call it bugbears, by the way.
Oh, is that
Never heard of that.
oh, really pet peeve? I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So when I had this round of CBT, she pulled me up on it because I think I might have been doing something similar, like writing the whole day off. If the morning wasn't going well, that was the whole day written off. And she got me to divide the day up into 3 sections to morning, afternoon, and evening. Now, she was still using good and bad language, which, from my perspective today, I don't know if it was particularly helpful. Maybe she was mirroring my language. I'm not sure. She talked about, can you have a bad morning and then a good afternoon and a good evening, dividing your day up like that. But there's something that I think the black and white all or nothing thinking does and perpetuates is this idea that when we've messed up, we need to start with a clean slate, which means a new day, maybe even a new week. Mondays, right?
Yeah.
But you have to start with this clean slate. It's not enough. The mind goes, it's not enough. It's not good enough to just try and get into balance at 3 p.m. if maybe you've binged at lunchtime. So
Yeah.
that was quite good because that did help me challenge it. It just meant that my sections got smaller. So I'd still say a bad morning or a bad afternoon. And I think this is kind of wants to lead me on actually to perfectionism because perfectionism is all or nothing, black and white thinking
Yes.
again. And a lot
Yes.
of people listening to this will struggle with perfectionism. And I didn't think that I struggled with perfectionism because I wasn't doing anything perfectly, because that was how I
Exactly.
understood perfectionism at the time.
Exactly. I don't know if you follow Dr. Jen on social media. She talks about perfectionism. It's not doing things perfectly. It's the expectation that you should be.
Uh-huh.
And I think that leads into something I wanted to say and that I feel or felt, still feel in some ways. And I see a lot of people also feeling is that if you do something that's more in the gray area, so if it's not the cleanest slate it could be, then it's seen almost as a mediocre attempt or it's some version of mediocrity. And that the desire to make things black and white gives you the opportunity to make something perfect because it's otherwise seen as meh. It might just be meh. And for high achievers or perfectionists, that's like a willingness to be mediocre. And that can be physically uncomfortable. Like I resonate with that too, where I remember feeling like if there was something that wasn't quite exactly in order or in line with what I imagined good was, ooh, like I just wanted to like get out of my own skin. It was very uncomfortable in this way that's confusing because it doesn't make logical sense because you're like, well, obviously worse is better than bad. If you're looking at it like that in those terms, it's like, well, really, really bad is not, why would I? And yet there's something more I can wrap my head around that more. It's something that, again, it gives you that, okay, but this is definitely what something is. And then it's not in that middle area of maybe being kind of good. That doesn't feel good enough.
Mhm. And I'm glad you mentioned mediocrity because that is absolutely been my struggle to find mediocrity because it's too painful. One of the most painful things I think about perfectionism and having really high expectations is you spend the majority of the time feeling like you're a failure. And then there's also a huge chunk of time spent in paralysis and procrastination because until you feel like you can do it to the level that you think you should, it doesn't feel possible to start. All of those things, it's this all or nothing thinking and perfectionism. It's a prison,
Yeah.
it really is a prison. And it's one that I don't feel like I'm in anymore. I get flashes of it and I catch it and I have to let it go and I
Yeah.
have to surrender and I have to remember. And I've got great people around me who remind me as well. So just thinking to all those people who might be listening to this and might be struggling, what I find a lot of people get stuck with is they hear this idea, they recognize themselves in it, and then they think, okay, but what now? Because I think when you're a black and white thinker, it's as if the gray doesn't exist. Like I cannot find the gray. And I did a post this week about mindful eating. And I think one of the reasons why people get stuck with mindful eating is because they're trying to approach it in an all or nothing way. Like I'm either being
Mhm.
super mindful, noticing every flavor, eating in a really calm way, touch with my body, all these things. Or I'm zoned out, I'm not paying attention, I'm numb, I'm dissociated, and I'm just eating as fast as I can. It's a swing between those two. So when we're looking at, I mean, I've got an idea. I want to throw it to you first, just to see where you would start with something like this when you're helping people to recognize their all or nothing thinking and where to begin when it comes to becoming more of a middle of the road thinker. What does it take to get from all or nothing to middle of the road? Assuming that's what people want.
Yeah. So when I hear the question immediately, one of the first things that I think about is I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast, but have I ever talked about the way I differentiate a binge from like a meta binge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So where the meta binge is the response to the guilt of the binge that prompts the binge to keep going. And that line of awareness of recognizing when you've moved from that, the binge that might have been driven by a particular trigger or a heightened emotional state that then sort of plays itself out and turns then into, then all of a sudden the guilt comes in because the guilt is saying, I did something bad. I did something wrong. I've failed. And then we binge because of that. And I think that recognizing where that line is, I mean, this is a technique that I use for in different ways, but I think that it's a good example of black and white thinking because it's where we start to binge because we did something bad instead of for the real original purpose of that binge. And when we can start to see where that line is, it creates awareness of I'm moving into black and white thinking. I'm moving into, well, I already ruined the day. I already binged. I might as well binge harder. Like I might as well keep going to, also this is a way of stuffing that shame and the guilt and avoiding that too in the emotional sense. But it's also a way of thinking in black and white and of just finishing out the day like that because today's going to be a bad day and tomorrow that means tomorrow is going to be hopefully a good day. So you got to get it out now. And that fosters that mentality entirely. So I begin by saying, okay, when we can recognize where that window is in our minds of almost voluntarily choosing to go into the black and white, that's a space to get more familiar with so that over time it becomes more identifiable in the moment instead of retroactively where we see like I know I do this thing, I see myself doing it, but I can't stop. When we can start to gain awareness of it as it's going on and see the thoughts, see what's going on in there, that's a good moment I think to begin to hook on to, oh, this is happening for me right now in this way, and then being able to watch those thoughts.
I love that distinction because I think that's something that's so helpful for people to see the difference between those two ways of binging. Because when I'd been in when I was in the meta binge cycles, it was almost this accumulative effect. I'm just trying to kind of piece it together in my mind of what that looked like. So it was for me in a meta binge cycle, I would be binging during the day. Very early on in my binge eating, I was getting up in the middle of the night. I was binging late at night. And then I wasn't sleeping. And I realized that the detrimental effect of not sleeping was so problematic at getting out of the cycle that it kind of seemed to shift. And I would binge earlier so that I wasn't binging right up to the point of going to bed so I could at least sleep. So what was happening is I'd have a day where I was binging and completely distracted from anything I was thinking or feeling because I was in that shame place that you were talking about. And then as bedtime approached and the binging ended, that was when everything rushed in. that was when that shame and that guilt rushed in. And then I would fall asleep feeling like that, which meant when I woke up, like I felt the binge was still there. Like I still wanted to binge. And I'd never put words on it like that. And I think that's a really useful way of looking at it and helping people to recognize that. Because I'll have people say to me, okay, how do I get rid of my black and white thinking then? It's just it makes me smile a little bit because it's such a all or nothing thing to say. I've recognized I've got a problem. Now I need to fix it. Let's get this gone. So I talk about it in terms of managing it, like trying to manage this tendency towards the all or nothing and black and white thinking. What has helped me when I've not known where the gray is, like I'm torn between terrible and brilliant, is that when I'm telling myself, I'm not doing well enough, or I've failed, or I've messed up, is to just notice that I'm telling myself and go, this might not be true. It might be true. So I'm not getting in an argument with myself because I'm not very likely in that moment to necessarily be able to convince myself that the opposite is true. But the moment I put a bit of doubt and I'm like, this is what I'm believing now, I know how changeable my thoughts and what my beliefs can be. This is what I'm believing and thinking now. It might not be true. What if something else was true? That for me was how I started to loosen up. That black and white thinking was to cast doubt, and that is letting go of the desire for certainty. And I think there's a grief that comes with that, or it was for me. There was a certain amount of grief or loss of something, at admitting that maybe I didn't know what was true. Maybe I was just designing my truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Defining my truth, yes. What can you give an example of that? Like what would be a belief that you would be that
So
might
the,
not be true?
so the belief, if I try and keep it on binging, because that's been more helpful to people, the belief after binging would be, I've completely failed. I'm never going to be able to stop doing this. I'm never going to figure this out. I'm such a what would like this idea of feeling like a fraud, because to everybody else I looked fine. It was that difference between feeling like such a mess behind closed doors, yet what I was presenting with my friends and in my work was everything was fine. So it felt like this almost, even before I became a therapist, it felt like this incongruence, I think, which then brought up this shame, and I was this terrible person. So I think the first thing I doubted was, maybe even though I'm struggling with this, it doesn't mean that I'm a completely screwed up person.
Okay.
It means that I'm somebody who's lost and I'm struggling with something.
Yeah.
And that's more gray than I'm completely screwed up. Nobody knows the real me. The person that everybody sees is not real, because that's not true either, because the person that people see is real too.
We just want to grab a moment of your time to let you know that we are now on YouTube. So if you can't wait for the next episode, we are going to be uploading the podcast onto our YouTube channel a day early. So please head over there and subscribe. We are Life After Diets Podcast on YouTube and on Instagram, and you can email the show lifeafterdietspodcast@gmail.com.
And if you're interested in working with me, Stefanie, I work with clients one-to-one, and I also am enrolling for a group program to work on intuitive eating foundations with a binge and emotional eating recovery lens. You can apply at www.IamStefaniemichele.com/application.
And if you want to connect with me, Sarah, I am the Binge Eating Therapist on Instagram and YouTube, and my website is thebingeeatingtherapist.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
That is the link, I think, between gray area and compassion. Because compassion, I think, has this, there's an idea that it means sappy, overly kind, as if that's a bad thing, but like overly kind, kindness towards oneself. When compassion can simply be offering yourself a gray area. It's of seeing something not in an absolute and saying there might be another way of looking at this. It's simple as that. So I think in that sense, in that way, compassion cultivation can be a way of working on black and white and all or nothing thinking in and of itself. I want to throw that back to body image as well, because I think it's not only with binging, but with body image. As you were talking, and I was thinking of beliefs that come up and ways of offering yourself a different or the option that might not be true. I think with body image, sometimes it's if I don't look this way, or if I don't fit into this size, or if I don't lose this amount of weight, then I can't participate in life. I can't show up. I can't be my best self. It has to be, my body has to match the life I want, or I can't start living it yet. And I see that all the time. And I also think that's a way that we put off participating in life the way, or we put off the potential failures that we may see on the horizon, or that we don't feel capable of dealing with yet. Because if our body's not good enough yet, then we can't, then we don't have to own that yet. We don't have to go there. We don't have to risk that failure. So we keep putting it on the body. But that, for me, some of the ways that I work on, and the way that I actually went through my black and white thinking with body image, was to realize that the story in my mind, and the story that I was fed by the media and just our, thin, obsessed culture, was that I had to look like this or else I couldn't enjoy my life. And that we have other options on the table, and that there's not one standard of beauty. And also, we don't even need it to be that. We don't need to objectify at all. We don't have to look a certain way, or even convince ourselves that diversity is beautiful. I mean, that's a worthy endeavor in seeing beauty in all different shapes, colors, sizes. Yes, but also that that doesn't even need to be part of the conversation. You still are worthy of living your best life, or, that's another black and white term, but of living a fulfilling life and participating in it outside of appearance at all. Like, that doesn't have to be a pursuit. And that can be just offering yourself the option that maybe it doesn't have to be like that. Maybe I can go to this event, even though my outfit doesn't look the way I want it to look. Maybe those two things can coexist. It doesn't have to be, well, if I don't look a certain way, then I can't go.
It feels like the bridge for me is in a moment of readiness to be able to go, okay, to me, it's always been an absolute truth that this has to be the case. I have to be eating and looking a certain way before I can participate in life. What if that wasn't true? Not saying that what Sarah and Steph say is true, because nowhere near that. But what if that willingness to doubt something we've held on to for so long? It comes into that whole, was it on the podcast I was talking about sunk cost thinking? Was that here or
I
somewhere
don't
else?
think so.
It's almost that idea of sunk cost thinking, which is this gambling term, this idea that you've already invested so much in, you can't fold
Mm.
now. You know, so even though you're looking, you're going, I'm probably going to lose. I've already put so many chips in, I can't fold. I have to stay until the end. And that, I think, is one of the things that holds us back from letting go of beliefs that
Mhm.
they've shaped our world and our view. So this is a big invitation that we're putting out there for people to consider that all these things you've held to be absolutely 100% non-negotiably true.
Mm.
What if they're not?
Yeah, you just brought up a lot for me. Um, because I'm thinking about how that's just rigid thinking. Like, there's a lot of rigid thinking, and the need to be rigid inside of black and white and all or nothing thinking. I'm thinking of this in so many ways. I'm thinking of times where I had really bought into, I look terrible, I'm not going to this party. Like, right? And once I got there, I like whined about it, and I threw a fit about it. I just really sat in it. And it was like, even if I wanted to come out, I couldn't, because it was like, I was in. I was into it. I was like, that was where I was gonna sit all night, and I just couldn't make my way out. And I'm thinking even of, like, sometimes with my kids now, like, if I'm getting frustrated and I'm like, okay, that's it. We're putting away screens for the rest of the week. Like, and then I'm like, oh gosh, but I can't back out now. It's like, and there's something about when I get emotionally invested in something, that it's very difficult for me to, like, come out. So a technique that I've recently learned that is actually really working for me is just, you tense up your muscles in whatever area of the body you're feeling this. For me, it's either my jaw or just my torso or my biceps. And you just tighten, 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 and hold it, hold it, hold it for 10 seconds. And then you just slowly release everything. I just did it, and now I just feel really calm and flexible. Um, and it just kind of, it's almost like the physical manifestation of something being very, very hard and very, very rigid. And then giving yourself permission to let it go and become something else. I mean, I just really like that as a practice, but it's something that you can recognize throughout, not just body image, not just food, many areas of life where this is happening, and that recognize it is hard. It's hard to sit in a position and then ask yourself to back out of it. I mean, I don't know why this happens. Maybe you have more insight into why we become like this, but I think it's very common, and I think that it's intentional work to learn how to not do that.
It's difficult to be wrong, isn't it? And I think that's the fear, that if we challenge something that we have held to be true, to then think or allow the possibility of it not being true is to allow being, I don't really want to use this word, but I'm kind of going with it almost to be provocative, is to be wrong, like to have held to something that's not true. And many of us, it's not comfortable to be wrong because our identity gets wrapped around it. So when a belief that has been so deeply held is threatened, our very sense of who we are is threatened.
Mm.
It's a
Yeah.
shift in how we view ourselves. And it's something that I've really it's been a bit of a journey the last few years with the social media stuff, where you get people coming who might quite vehemently disagree with what you're saying. And to be able to think, okay, where's the truth in this? Like, where is the truth? I had someone the other day say it was sickening that I was encouraging or telling people not to lose weight when people are dying of dietary related diseases. Like, this was her point. And I had to think, okay, she's got a different way of coming at this. And she had gone through her own recovery in a much different, more structured. She'd almost, the way I saw it was she had used the black and white thinking
Yeah.
through, because she did the whole cutting things out and stuff like that. This is the only way to recover
Yes,
from binge
I see
eating,
this too.
So that is an option to utilize to stay in the black and white thinking for that. And I'm not saying that everybody goes down the route cutting stuff up, that it's not. I feel like I've tied myself into a knot here. I think I might even want to just totally pull that bit out about the comment or start it again.
Okay.
Because I don't want to start making presumptions about people who've done this in a different way. I don't think that is,
I know what you mean, though. I've seen that too.
yeah, that is helpful. Yeah, it's been a bit of a journey for me on social media, because when people come at me vehemently disagreeing with what I say, that used to feel like right at the beginning, that felt really attacking. But I've become less and less attached to even the stuff I talk about now. So I don't know if in 3 or 4 years' time, I might be talking about this stuff very differently. I'm open to that because my identity has shifted in who I want to be. And the identity that I am embracing is this idea of somebody who is open to being criticized, because there's normally some truth in it. There's normally some information. If I'm willing to not allow my identity to be threatened by someone, and I'm not talking about people being abusive or mean in that way. I'm talking about people coming in and being critical. There's usually some truth. There's usually somewhere where we converge. I was chatting to a woman who I'm going to interview for this therapist event, and she used the word naughty when she was talking about certain foods, certain experiences. This wasn't during the interview, this is in the preamble where we were just getting to know each other. And she'd also used another very unhelpful diet mentality term that I had pulled her up on. And she very willingly accepted it. Said, you're absolutely right. That was not the right language. But then she used this word naughty again. When we got to the end of the conversation, I said to her, how comfortable are you to be pulled up if I feel like you say something that may be harmful to some people? She said, no, I'm completely open to it. She goes, why? Was there something else I said? And I was like, didn't want to sound like the person who's just jumping on her all the time going, you can't say that, can't say that, can't say that.
Mm.
So I mentioned the naughty thing as well. And we had this really interesting, very open discussion about how that word naughty felt to her. She appreciated that how that can be felt and interpreted within the diet mentality. But for her, it was this sort of playfulness. It was this, it was something else to her, even though she was using this word that I think is quite problematic from a diet mentality perspective. So I think what I was trying to say is when we're willing to have those challenges, whether it's with another person or we're challenging ourselves, if we can look for the common ground, look for being less invested in being right, there's a real opportunity for growth. And it's the same with food. The way I believed about this stuff for years, the answer is more discipline, more control. The answer is I need to be like this, I need to be like that. When we're willing to challenge that and we get down to what it is that we're valuing underneath that, chances are there's a possibility for something else.
Well, being right is easier because then you know what to do. You've constructed a lot of your behaviors and your belief systems and your way of moving through the day without thinking too much about it on the things you believe that you're right about. So when you open yourself up to the possibility of being kind of right or partly right or wrong, in some cases, then there's a lot of energy that goes into having to deal with that, even mentally. Like it's like, well, then if I'm not, then I don't know the path after this. I don't know how to think about this then, because it affects a lot of other things then. It has a domino effect. So it's just so much easier to be right. And I think that part of it is maybe the ego itself not wanting to be wrong, but also the energy involved in shifting things in our belief system at all, even as far as knowing what to do after. If I contemplate that I'm not a failure now, then how do I follow up this binge? I don't know. I'm much more comfortable doing it the way I know how. There's a path then. It's like, okay, I binge the rest of the day. I get super full. I feel really bad. I feel terrible, which will help me motivate tomorrow to do it better and to be cleaner and to be, on track because I need that level of shame to motivate my tomorrow. So it's like a whole system of behavior that's set up when we believe one thing to be true. It makes that a lot easier. We don't have to think about it. But if we entertain the idea that there's a different way of looking at it, then well, now you jeopardize my tomorrow because now tomorrow I'm going to be thinking maybe I don't have all this shame. And then that's going to throw me off. Then I might binge tomorrow. I think that there's a whole, like, it catapults all this stuff. It's just so much easier to be right. So sometimes I think in this process of flexibility, there's messiness. And that's part of why it's hard because it isn't just this, oh, well, I'll just be open and flexible now and move along. It's like, oh, well, there's going to be a lot of there's some uncomfortable stuff that is going to show up and it may affect you and your behavior and even your binging or your body image even more so in that shifting space until we are, it seemed like the whole recovery process itself, it's messy before it feels freer. It feels worse before it feels freer. I think it's the same with the mental shifts.
Embracing the messy middle means letting go of something. And it's letting go of that very, very compelling, idealized image of how we think, one, we should be, and two, part of us believes that we could be that one day. That's why we keep pushing ourselves to do that. And I think we want to feel special, like the ego. That's what our ego and identity does. We want to feel, we want to feel, I think, I do it from the I want to feel worthy. And sometimes my ego says to me, in order to be worthy, you have to be special.
Mm.
And that, I think, is the challenging belief that is one that I'd had to do some work on. Maybe other people can relate to it. I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody, but there is a loss. And I find that people that really embrace this process, there's often you talked about it getting worse before it gets better. I often see that as a kind of a grieving process of going through this, letting go, this grief for this image that you believed was possible and finding out that it didn't exist, or even the uncertainty of does it exist, because we can't even say for absolute certainty in a black and white way that it doesn't exist. So this is the constant challenging and questioning. But actually, when we become less certain, we open ourselves up to life surprising us. And sometimes that might be really good feeling surprises, and sometimes those surprises might not be as good. But it's kind of accepting life on life's terms.
Mm.
And that is I wanted to say humbling again, which reminds me, we did talk about doing a humility episode because
Yes, I thought about it today, actually.
great subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something humbling about letting go of that idea of being right and of knowing more than we actually do.
It's like you got to keep doing that for the rest of your life. It's so annoying.
Living, you know what? Sometimes I just get these moments where I think, gosh, life is a lot of effort.
Yeah,
A lot of effort.
exactly. It's a lot of
Yeah.
effort.
And some days I'm like, yeah, bring at it. I can enjoy that. And other days I'm like, oh, do I have to? Do I have to go through the job of doing this
Just
day?
be stable. Oh, jeez.
But this is the thing, and this may not be true, but I feel like for some people it is more stable. There are people out there, when we talk about the smaller percentage of people who do seem to be able to diet, one of the things I've seen in the people in my life who've done it is they're these real level-headed, steady Eddie kinds of personalities. And I imagine to be that kind of personality, I don't know, this is my projection. It must be like, I don't know, I'm imagining that life feels pretty consistent. Whereas for me, because I'm more up and down, like the world can change on a dime. One day the world is full of possibilities and incredible place of
Yeah.
opportunity. And another day it's this oppressive, unpredictable, dangerous place. Um, Gosh, that got big quick, didn't it?
Yeah. And now I'm like, I'm invested. Go ahead. Keep going.
I mean, I think that was it. But I think that if you're somebody who struggles with all or nothing thinking, you're also somebody who's likely to go more up and down with your moods.
Yep.
And our emotions often are the lens that we see this world through, our emotions and our beliefs, which
Yes.
means it's not the world changing, it's us changing, but it
Yes.
feels like the world around us is changing. Sometimes it's cooperating, right? Sometimes we're
Yes.
doing this amazing job of controlling our diets, doing the exercise, feeling amazing, thinking we can feel like this forever. That was the trap I fell into. When I felt great, I felt like I could feel like
Mhm.
this forever. And then when I didn't and I came down, oh, the disappointment.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. I keep having this image, this whole conversation of climbing up. I picture being in water, like rapids, and climbing up. And like the goal is always to finally get up and you lay on the raft on top and you're like, ah, I made it. And then you imagine that you get there and then you coast. And it's no, you're in rapids. You're going to be pulled back down again. It's easier to just ride. It's easier to understand that those rapids are coming instead of to go on the highs and lows of like thinking you've reached somewhere or escaped somewhere or you're drowning. And as you were talking, I was like, wait, I used to be that. That my moods were entirely dictated by highs and lows, and to some extent they still are. But I think I was like, how is it not so bad now? And I'm thinking, I think part of that is because it's a recognition that nowhere you are is absolute and that it will pass. And so it's offering that flexibility of thought of being aware. I think I bought into it before. It was like if it was bad, that was where it was going to stay. It's like that expectation that when you get somewhere, you stay there and that it stays stable there. And in fact, it is a series of ups and downs. And there's times we feel better and right. And then there's times we feel absolutely wrong and a failure and every shade in between. But that all of those phases, none of them stick. You're not getting somewhere. You're not ever gonna get somewhere and stay there for the most part. It's a series of moving. It's like this fluid thing, and I'm thinking when you're talking about the people who seem to have it easier, my husband is like that because he's not attached to anything. He's flexible all the time in a very black and white thing to say, but like he just seems like he's alright with the movement of life, and he, like, expects it, and he doesn't attach too much to any one outcome. So, he seems to have an easier time. And, that's just how he is, and I'm not like that, but I also feel like the less attachment I've learned to have to being anywhere, the more I'm able to move out of it faster, and, that's kinda how I see life now. I get that. I see that as part of how it works, and I'm okay-ish with that.
Mhm. Totally agree. Well, it depends when you ask me. Today, I'm very
Yeah, exactly.
ask me on another day and we'll see. But yeah, when I came to the point where I accepted that this part of me, I always thought my job was to learn how to get into this steady, stable place all the time. When I accepted that actually I am a bit more, I'm a sprinter. I sprint and then I drop and then I sprint and then I drop. I'm not a marathoner. I'm not that steady pace kind of person. But once I accepted that about myself, it already reduced.
Yeah.
And I'm much closer to that middle. I still go up and down, but I'm much closer to that middle than I ever was before when I was trying to change that part of myself.
Mhm.
That's the paradox of acceptance, right?
It is,
Yeah.
in so many ways.
Mm. Okay, maybe it's time for just some final thoughts as we close this episode. So, Steph, what would you like to leave the listeners with? What stood out for you about this conversation?
I think for black and white, for all or nothing, to see it as it is a version of trying to control a situation, which is human to wanna do, but that the alternative to that, the gray area, isn't mediocrity as much as it is openness and flexibility and that actually being the opposite of mediocrity, in that it allows for more opportunities and it allows for more options of moving through life that expand rather than constrain.
I think I would want to invite people to reflect on those beliefs or those facts that you assume to be true around your struggle with food, to see whether, or try on how it feels to say, maybe this might not be true. What if this isn't true? This belief that I hold. It doesn't mean it's not. So, this is not about trying to convince yourself of anything. It's just that willingness to question and open up. And actually, by letting go of being right, what that actually brings is a sense of freedom. And if you can embrace this process, there is a relief in not having to control everything, in not having to have everything figured out, if you can get to that place. So, on that note, we're going to bring this episode to a close. Thank you very much, Steph, for an illuminating conversation as always.
Thank you, Sarah. And thanks everyone listening. And we will see you again next week.
Thank you. Bye bye.